and welcome to the Executive Committee meeting on the 15th of September. And this is the executive meeting of the Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority. Although members of the public are allowed to attend and observe in limited numbers, we are recording the meeting and a copy will be uploaded to the authority's YouTube channel. To comply with social distancing guidelines, some officers will be contributing to the meeting remotely. In order to facilitate the best possible experience for all those participating in the meeting, can I please ask those participating in the meeting remotely to switch off your microphones and cameras, and when not speaking, switch off your microphones when not speaking, and your camera if you wish to speak, so that Mr. Britton will be able to inform you that you would like to do so.
Morning.
Good morning. Officers in the room with me are as follows: the Chief Fire Officer, Jason Thelwell, the Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Nick Osborne, the Director of Legal and Governance, Graham Britton, and PA to the Director of Finance and Assets, Caroline Jordan. Caroline's here to take the minutes today because Katie Nellist, the person who usually has that task, is unwell. Our best wishes to you, Katie. We are also joined in the room by Emily Hilling, our new Communications, Marketing and Engagement Manager, and welcome to Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Fire Authority. So, do we have any apologies?
Councillor Christensen.
Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of July on pages 7 to 12. Are there any questions to the accuracy? Are you happy that I signed them as a true record?
Very good.
Thank you. Are there any disclosures of interests? Any matters arising from the previous meeting? We were hoping that this meeting might last 6 hours, but I don't think we do that. Questions? Are there any questions?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. So we go to item number 6, which is the Budget Monitoring Report, April 2021 to June 2021. And Councillor David Hopkins will introduce this, and then it will be presented by Asif Hussain.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I have very little to say by way of introduction. The things are going swimmingly at the moment. I do have 2 or 3 questions which I'll ask after Asif has actually made his presentation. But by way of introduction, I think we just need to crack on and hear what Asif has to say.
So Asif, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Good morning, members. I'm presenting the Budget Monitoring Report as at the end of June 2021. Table 1 provides an overview of each directorate's budget and forecast outturn. The current expenditure forecast of 31.6 million against a budget of 32.277 million results in an underspend of 677,000. However, due to the additional funding of 384,000 in relation to protection grants and local tax income guarantee, we are seeing a net overall underspend of just over 1 million. Due to these underspends, we no longer need to fully utilise the 1.1 million planned use of reserves, and are instead now projecting to transfer 52,000 from reserves to balance the funding requirement. Any fluctuations in the figure throughout the financial year will be captured and monitored to ensure the use of reserves is minimised and offset against any underspends identified within the expenditure. The next page provides a summary of the variances being seen within each directorate. You will see most of the underspends are seen within finance and assets and delivery, corporate development and planning. Within finance and assets, we're seeing an underspend which predominantly relates to a rebate review, business rates rebate review, which we received in relation to a rates review we carried out this financial year. The review carried out by external specialists identified reductions in the rateable value of several stations and was backdated to 2017. This resulted in an underspend of 256k against our rates review budget. The other area with high level of underspends are seen predominantly within employee costs. Moving on to table 2, this shows the breakdown of favourable and adverse variances relating to direct employee costs. Higher underspends are shown under hold time relating to new recruits joining the 2015 pension scheme and replacing existing post holders on 1992 pension scheme, which has a higher employer contribution rate. On-call underspends relate to activity and training costs, and underspends seen within support staff are due to delays in recruitment caused by COVID and restructures taking place, resulting in savings in establishment costs. Agency staff have been used to partly cover interim vacancies within support roles, and this is offset by support staff underspends. Moving on to the next page, which is table 3. This table shows the actual spend since March 2020 in relation to the COVID pandemic and how we utilize the 801k of COVID funding. Funding has been used to cover additional employee costs, protective equipment, and IT upgrades. Based on current projections, the COVID funding will be fully utilized by September 2021. Moving on to table 4, which is the funding table. This highlights the point that I made earlier about the additional 384k funding for the current financial year. As stated earlier, most of this funding relates to protection, and the rest relates to additional local tax income guarantee funding, which is forecast to be 100k better than anticipated. Finally, moving on to the capital table, we have a capital program budget for 2021-22 for 2.402 million. Property capital funds are utilised to carry out planned expenditure against our property condition surveys. We obviously no longer are incurring any costs relating to the Blue Light Hub now, because that's now complete, and the forecast estimates the final cost for the Blue Light Hub for this financial year. Majority of the fire appliances and equipment budget will be utilised to purchase Red Fleet appliances and the related operational equipment as well. A slippage of 369k has been forecast due to delays in the delivery of 2021-22 appliances, which we should hopefully receive later this financial year. In terms of IT, predominantly most of the budget relates to the $500,000 WAN LAN rollout this year. In terms of updates for the WAN LAN project, scope and works have been completed and hardware requirements have been agreed. And discussions with Buckinghamshire County Council or Buckinghamshire Unitary Council are going really well. And we hope for this project to be completed by the end of this financial year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman, and thank you, Asif, as ever, a very detailed report, for which we're all grateful. 3 very, very quick questions. Can you just tell me, with regards to the last point you were making, has there been any negative operational impact, or do you see any negative operational impact of the late delivery of equipment? Is there any impact on the government's announcement of the national insurance contribution rise? And if so, what is that? And thirdly, the consolidation of posts. Any public sector organisation is subject to potential criticism when there's a consolidation of posts that we've been overstaffed. I'm sure that's not the case. And indeed, it's good operational management to review staffing levels and have when you consider a consolidation opportunity. But just want to be certain that that sort of review is ongoing and that we are operating at maximum efficiency in terms of staffing levels. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Some really good questions there. So if I go in order of questions. So the first question, I believe, was around the fire appliances and slippages. It hasn't had any operational impact. We have a really good fleet workshop team that maintain our appliances. And obviously, even though some of those appliances are due for replacement, the maintenance of them is done to a really good standard, which means that we can keep them on a bit longer than anticipated. Till date, we haven't had any issues. And to be honest, in terms of the delivery of the appliances, I think there hasn't been a year that hasn't gone where appliances have been delayed. But we've got a really good fleet workshop team that are maintaining our appliances and ensuring there has no operational impact on our operational staff and the ability to get the pumps out. So I think we're good with regards to that. But in an ideal world, we'd like to get appliances delivered in a timely manner. But the impact of obviously COVID, Brexit and everything else that's been going on has naturally had an impact on the delays in terms of the appliances. If I could just touch on your last question first before I move on to the NI one. In terms of the consolidation posts, I totally agree in terms of your comments. Obviously, we do our due diligence and ensure that there are efficiencies in place before we take this decision. And this decision wasn't really taken lightly. It stems back to 2017 when we had iTrent and Integra, which is our finance and HR system. We obviously brought them in-house and moved away from SAP, which allowed us to identify some efficiencies and better ways of working. Moreover, a couple of years ago, we had the payroll team join the finance team and now are part of one team. And last year, this opportunity arose for me to kind of review the payroll and finance structure when we had a finance member of staff leave and had an existing vacancy within the payroll team. That gave me the opportunity to look at the tasks that are pretty much transactional between both teams. And I felt at the time, in order to identify efficiencies and integrate both teams, it'd be useful to kind of combine that role into one. The person has now been employed into that post since April 2021, and it seems to be going well. So it wasn't a decision that wasn't taken lightly. We have identified efficiencies in order to do that, and it couldn't have been done any sooner than we did. So I think we've definitely done our due diligence in terms of ensuring that there are efficiencies. We don't have any additional staff than necessary. On top of that, though, I'd just like to state, as part of our processes now, any new post that we're looking to recruit to, the Director of Finance and Assets highlights that at SMT level, and we approve it at that level before any post is recruited to. So we are ensuring that we are recruiting to what's needed and not necessarily recruiting to what we probably don't need in terms of establishment. Moving on to your last point about NI, yes, initially when it came out in the Prime Minister's meeting that obviously national insurance increases. Initially, it didn't look like it was going to be an increase for us. And I might ask Mark to kind of come in, but when you've looked into the detail of it, it does look like Treasury will fully fund the increase in national insurance contribution for the local government sector. So we're quite confident that there won't be any additional cost to us as long as it's fully funded. But the devil is in the details. So until that funding isn't obviously made available, I can't say that for certainty, but the guidance that's come out from the government, it clearly does state Treasury will fully fund the local government sector. But Mark, if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, just to give members some reassurance, that is covered in the document. Paragraph 86 says that public sector employers will be fully recompensed for any increases in national insurance contributions. I've also had conversations with colleagues in the Home Office who have agreed that point. They're having conversations with MHCLG around just the practicalities of doing that, whether it's going to be added to our baseline funding, whether it's going to be a specific grant, but we're working together to make sure we are fully funded for that. So just to give members that reassurance, there'll be no additional increased cost for us directly. There may be some longer term additional increases in terms of if suppliers try to pass on their costs to us, but we'll factor that in as part of the normal budget setting process.
Thank you.
Councillor Marland.
Thank you. And just around the projected non-use of reserves, obviously that's been covered by additional grant rather than any, just confirm that's been sort of any change in the baseline position, and that the baseline for 22-23 will still remain quite difficult, because obviously any budget that's been covered by reserves is a gap in actual baseline funding, and the underspend is basically because we've got more money in one-off grants rather than ongoing money. And just in terms of the ongoing budget as well, which it's just been touched on by Mark. Actually, I think it was this morning that the government have actually said that the national insurance rise won't cover non-direct suppliers. So any contracted out services that we've got will effectively pass that on. But obviously, inflation has obviously gone up as well today. Mm-hmm. And what our exposure around inflation might be, both wage inflation and general inflation on contract.
Yep, Councillor Mann, there's some really good points there. You are correct in terms of our underspend. When you discount the additional funding we received, when you discount the additional rates rebate that we received, the underspend would have been pretty minimal after you take out the pension costs as well. So yeah, that pressure of use of reserves will probably remain for next year as well. We are in the iterative process of setting next year's budget, and we are probably looking at similar figures again. Without this additional one-off funding, we are looking at use of reserves. So that doesn't change the dynamics of the financial picture. We're not in any sort of better position. Yes, for this financial year as a snapshot, it looks good. But going forward, all the other discussions we've had around the flexibility for council tax and stuff still remains. In order to have a sustainable budget going forward, we do need the additional funding and that additional flexibility without having to use the reliance on use of reserves. The other point you made is a good point as well. And the only thing, the contract I can think of is probably our cleaning contract that's been outsourced. So for that, we might not get fully funded in terms of NI contribution. So they may look to include that into their contracts. And that final point about inflation, yes, you definitely got a good point there. Inflation is going to play a part in terms of our budget. We're factoring that in as part of our MTFP process for next financial year. In addition to that, I'd like to think any inflation CPI uplift will also be reflected in our government grants as well. Obviously, it won't negate the total inflation cost, but will play a part in it. But we are looking at all those factors when we're building our budget for next financial year.
So what you've actually said is that we're still in the same position that we were before, that we do need that extra flexibility with our precept.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you for raising that point, Councillor Marland. Thank you very much indeed. Anybody? Sorry, Councillor McLean.
As if on the table 5 capital monitoring, the second line is property reviews, no budget for it, but it's spent 23,820 to date and projected 257. I can't see anything in the commentary. I'm sorry if I missed anything in what you said. Could you give some information on that, please?
Yeah. That predominantly relates to residual amounts owing to the Blue Light Hub budget. So the residual provisional outturn includes any retained elements that we had to pay. So there's like a 5% that we tend to kind of hold back until at least 12 to 18 months after the project's been completed. So that predominantly relates to the Blue Light Hub.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions? No. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Hussain, for a very good report. Thank you. We then go on to item 7, which
Shall we
is...
take the recommendation?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Apologies. Apologies.
Page 13.
I know, I've got it here. So can we take the recommendation on page 13, which is that the provisional outcome forecast for the authority as of 30th of June 2021 be noted?
Noted.
Noted.
Thank you. I can go on to item 7 now. Item 7. This is the Thames Valley Fire Control Service mobilising system requirements. I actually visited the Thames Valley Fire Control down in Reading for the first time, and I have asked if there's a possibility that members could go and have a look, because I think it'd be very interesting. Now, Mick Osborne's going to take us through this, so I don't have anything to add other than I was impressed with the building, so over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, members. I'm presenting this on behalf of Area Commander Steve Wells today, who can't be with us, so please treat me gently, but I'll do my very best to answer any questions that you may have afterwards. So, as detailed within the executive summary, the purpose of this report is to receive the recommendation from the Thames Valley Fire Control Service Joint Committee that met on the 12th of July this year, which is pursuant to the agreement relating to the steady state operation of Thames Valley Fire Control Service, and that is to agree to extend the Thames Valley Fire Control Service mobilising system contract for 1 year from April 22 to March 23, and then also note the projected expenditure from the Thames Valley Fire Control Service renewals account commensurate with the requirements detailed within the Capita System report, which is summarised within this paper. As many members will be aware, the Thames Valley Fire Control Service, which this authority is part of, went live in April 2015. The agreement for which covers a 15-year period up until April 2030. The Thames Valley Fire Control Service utilises Vision 4 mobilising system, which is currently provided by Capita Secure Solutions and Services Limited. Within the current mobilising system contract, the initial service period was set for 7 years, expiring in April 22, with options to extend service support provision for up to 8 years, so a maximum total of 15 years. The contract review point aligns to the requirement of the agreement that as soon as reasonably practicable following the 5th anniversary of the commencement date, fire authorities shall discuss whether the contract should be extended together with any upgrade, modifications or refresh to the system. Principally due to the service's response to COVID-19 and timelines specified within the contract, presentation of these recommendations to the Thames Valley Fire Control Service Joint Committee was not practical prior to the meeting held on the 12th of July 21. As detailed within the agreement, the Joint Committee, created by the 3 fire and rescue authorities, provides overall strategic direction and oversight for the control service. The interests of the authority are currently represented on the Joint Committee by the Chairman, Councillor Leslie Clark, the Joint Committee's current Vice Chairman and Councillor Stephen Lambert. The recommended 1-year extension of the contract from April 22 to April 23 enables this authority to monitor and react to the outcomes of the sale of Capita Secure Solutions and Services Limited, which we expect to take place imminently. Furthermore, Chief Fire Officer Rob McDougall of Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service has been leading a piece of work through the National Fire Chiefs Council Strategic Commercial Board to work with government, fire and rescue services and Capita to mitigate this risk and seek assurances on continued service provision, supporting the 60% of UK fire and rescue services that currently use Capita mobilising systems in advance of and following completion of the sale. The 1-year extension also allows the authority the opportunity to consider associated activity toward implementation of the Emergency Services Network, which is the replacement for the current airwave communication system, which, as we know, has on several occasions seen extensions to the project timelines, thereby creating a level of uncertainty for services and in particular control rooms. The associated costs with extending the service contract by a further year are detailed within the report. Any periods of extension to the service require Capita to provide a system report. The system report sets out expected performance levels and recommends hardware upgrade and refresh options that will be necessary for Thames Valley Fire Control Service to maintain an appropriate, robust and resilient level of technological capability and enable Capita to continue to provide support through any recommended extension period. Again, detailed within the report for noting is the projected expenditure from the Thames Valley Fire Control Service renewals account, commensurate with the requirements detailed within the Capita system report. Whilst that expenditure is significant, it's important to note the reserve, which includes the accumulated annual contributions of 50,000 from each authority, plus a one-off contribution at implementation, which now stands at around 1.8 million. That concludes my presentation on the report. Obviously, happy to field any questions.
Councillor Marland.
Yeah. So, if I've understood this right, this is effectively a 15-year contract that had a 5-year base and then an option to extend the contract. And because of COVID, the work hasn't been able to be done on whether to extend the contract. I suppose my question would just be about the risk.
No, I believe that Capita are selling off part of the Capita SSS. And
Yes, it's both, yeah.
Yes.
Both, yeah.
So I suppose the risk is, how would a decision be taken, or when is a decision likely on whether to extend the contract for a significant period of time? And would it be within the year extension, or would it be after the year extension? And if it is in the year extension and the decision is taken not to extend that contract, how long would the procurement process be to then re-tender it and have a new contract? And what would the risk of delivery be within that period? Because a number of these organisations don't necessarily put all their effort into contracts that they're not going to be able to deliver for any period of time. So the risk might be, after this 1-year period, the organisation decides not to continue delivering it and we would be left with no provider. So the question is, what is the risk there?
You asked all the same questions in the debate we had on this in Reading.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I
that?
can come in on part of that. Obviously, I wasn't at that meeting, but my understanding is that the work that was due to go to the July meeting of this year to look at the longer term extension hasn't been done, but that will be done during this extension period of 1 year, with then the option will be to either extend for the longer period or then to go out to tender. So because the tender process could, you know, in experience, take up to 2 years. But all of that work will be done between now and the next Thames Valley Fire Control Service Joint Committee meeting to be taken back there. So this buys us the year to do that piece of work that didn't get done during COVID.
But there is a risk there that because contracts work two ways, at the end of this 1 year extension, it might not just be the customer that decides not to extend the contract. If the provider decides this is a market after being sold, we want to exit, and procurement takes 2 years, you could end up with a period of 18 months where there is no provider.
So ASIF's coming there.
Yeah,
but
we're not the only people. that use-
60%.
I understand that.
So, yes,
if
but
the,
there
if
is
the
a risk,
procurement period
there
is
is a
2
risk.
years,
There is.
after 6 months, we decide in 6 months' time, all these people decide they want to re-tender the contract, but at that point, or the provider leaves the market, you could end up with an 18-month to 2 year
Yes, exactly,
period
with
where you
nothing.
don't have a provider.
Exactly. Asif, do you want to answer? Have you've obviously.
Yep.
So it's about asking what the contingency would be rather than.
I think Councillor Marlin's raised a good point. My understanding is actually with the service itself, there isn't an issue. The reason why we've gone with the 1 year extension predominantly is because obviously Capita are looking to sell off. As they're looking to sell off, there's a risk that the new provider that comes in might not provide the same level of service and stuff. So we're hoping that will come into effect prior to actually getting into next financial year. So we'd be looking to make that decision really early on if we were going to extend beyond that. If everything plans out the way it should and the new provider provides the same level of service and stuff, I think we'd just be looking to do the uplift in terms of the capital program. In terms of the provider itself, we'll probably continue with them. So I'd say the risk isn't as high. The risk reason we would have probably extended for a lot longer, the risk has just come in because Capita are looking to sell off and we don't want to go in long term with a provider that may not provide the level of service that we've got in the past.
I believe that we should know, I believe September was the cut-off date, wasn't it, for knowing who was going to actually purchase the Triple S?
Yes.
Have we had any?
I've not heard anything first, and I don't know if Graham is present as well. I don't know, Graham, if you heard anything from a legal aspect, but I've not heard anything as of yet from the Thames Valley Control Room.
I can add some additional context to this and additional comfort to members in that this is obviously a review of the mobilising system, but within the inter-authority agreement to which Berkshire and Oxfordshire are party, there's also a review period which is going to come up, and it's coming up very shortly. So the budget setting meeting in February, there will be a decision of the full authority not only to go forward with this particular mobilising contract, but also whether to continue participation in the Thames Valley Fire Control Service itself. So that will be a review period to look at the whole picture, the risks, and whether we wish to continue to participate with that, knowing the risks.
Because we were supposed to know by now who was buying it, or if it was a management buyout. We
I
don't
have
know.
no problem with the decision. The decision is obvious.
Yeah.
The decision is obvious. It's within the risk management
Yes, it's
section.
exactly.
It's where it would sit on the risk management.
It's quite high, actually.
Risk register and what the contingency would be and whether it needs a contingency.
And I think that's exactly what Asif said. I think at the moment, because we don't know what's actually happening, we don't know where Triple S is and who's buying it or who's not. And then that's the other thing is, as we go further down the line, if the service is not as good as we're getting, then that's when we really do have to go out to procurement and find something better. And that is the issue as well.
I think the bit for
Yes.
me, in terms of it's a national problem, because most of the services, 60% of the services are actually on the system. So it has been picked up as a risk in the Home Office, and like I said, Robin Dougal from Oxfordshire is representing us on that board, but there is a national risk to it. and that involves the Home Office and government in terms of making sure that provision can continue.
But it is a worry, and it was a long debate when it was brought up when we had our joint meeting.
Madam Chairman, part of the work that we were doing at the last meeting in July was also looking at the page 26, item 2, the technical refresh.
Yeah.
Was also to get us over that hurdle, because that's a significant expenditure for a system we could be scrapping. But the idea was it gave us longevity of the service technical side, covering the sale and procurement period. It brings it up to date effectively. As a technical system. I mean, it is working, it has its patches and fixes as it goes along, but this it changes or improves the nature of it to give it extra legs so it won't fall over during that transition period.
Just a technical question then on item 2. That is capital expenditure, but if the contract doesn't go for an extra year, I assume it can't be capitalised because it wouldn't reach the capitalisation standard of time. So it would become a revenue expenditure.
Yeah, I think we'll be really up the creek with a broken paddle if that happens. Yes, Asif.
Yeah, so the extension is actually part of revenue costs. So that's about the 71k that's in the paper. That's already fully funded as part of the Thames Valley Control Room budget. The additional stuff is the hardware and stuff. That's the bit that we're going to look to capitalise depending on what decision we make. Is there going to be a full refresh, a partial refresh? And I believe Royal Berkshire are working with the Thames Valley Control Room to present a budget in December that tells us how that looks. And that will then be reported back to our committee.
And it's expected to go up.
Chairman, just picking up on Councillor Marland's point, what I can undertake to do is to go away from this meeting and speak to Robin McDougall, see what the latest national position is involved in the Home Office, and inform members of this committee what the very latest position.
That would be lovely. Thank you. Any other questions? No?
Chairman, just before you go back to the recommendation, going back to your point earlier about visiting control, if anyone would like to visit control on either a Monday, Wednesday or Thursday during October, if you could let Katie know and we'll arrange for that to happen. We can only do it in groups of 4 or 5 at the moment. Yeah, Monday, Wednesday or Thursday I've been asked to mention, and if you wanted to make contact with Katie, we can make that happen.
Super, thank you very much indeed. So we go back to the recommendations on page 25, which is to agree to extending the Thames Valley Fire Control Service mobilising system contract for 1 year from April 2022 to March 23, and note the projected expenditure from the TVFCS renewal account commensurate with the requirement detailed within the Capita system report, which are summarised within this paper. Are we happy with that recommendation?
Very agreed.
Right. We then go to agenda item 8, and would you like to read the necessary?
Certainly, Chairman. The proposal is that the public and press be excluded from the meeting by virtue of paragraph 1 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as the appendices to the succession planning report contain information relating to an individual, and paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as the appendices contain information relating to the financial or business affairs of a person, including those of the authority, and on these grounds it is considered the need to keep the information exempt outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. That's the proposal, Chairman.
Thank you.
Any dissenting?
Thank you very much.
And that resolution is passed.
Sorry, 2 people leaving. Oh, can we agree that resolution?
Agreed.
Okay, we go to